Welcome to the Cornell Cooperative Extension Dairy Herd Health Troubleshooting Podcast, a podcast series focused on how to go about looking into health issues on a dairy. Each episode will discuss a different area on the dairy where herd health can be impacted. This series has less to do with providing answers to problems. We'll be talking about how to be more successful in your investigations.
Welcome to the Fresh Cow episode of Troubleshooting Herd Health Issues on Your Dairy. I'm Margaret Quaassdorff from the Northwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops team, and I'm joined today by Dr. Rob Lynch of PRO-DAIRY. Today we're going to talk about troubleshooting challenges fresh cows face in the first 30 or so days of lactation. In a previous episode, Casey and I went through a pretty thorough list of the kinds of challenges that transition cows face, so we won't dive deep into those issues again. Today, we're going to speak more on the topics of mastitis, nutrition, and touch on rumination and health tracking software. Rob, would you like to start us off by diving into troubleshooting fresh cow disease?
Sure. I guess one of the issues we run into with this particular area on the dairy is the information accurate? So we're looking at our fresh cow, we're looking at how much disease they're experiencing. We want to know, are we having too much? Is there too much metritis? Are we having too many DAs? And obviously we'd love it if we had none of these things, but we're going to have some, and we want to understand when we're having too much. And the real trick in this is just having data to rely on. The variability around case definitions, like how is ketosis defined on this dairy? And is it the same by everybody who works with the fresh cows? Is the weekend diagnosis the same as the weekday diagnosis? And is all this information captured in a way that's consistent and something that we can review on a regular basis? And if we can do all of those things with our disease events, we can better manage them and have better confidence that this trend is real or not, because our numbers are better. And that's tricky because it comes down to just protocol definitions and, just making sure everybody's trained up on how to follow those protocols so they can be more accurate in arriving at these common conditions that our fresh cows sometimes get. And then if we've got the numbers that we can count on, then we can start looking at those incidence rates. And when they start going over our alarm levels, like what percentage of my cows that came fresh this month had milk fever or had a DA, if they climb over our alarm levels, then we know it's time to start looking into what's gone wrong.
Rob, what do you think are some of the best ways that people can track these fresh cow diseases and keep track of these things?
Yeah, the more automated the system, the better. So I like using the protocol feature in Dairy Comp, but simply just having consistent case definitions defined and recording those things when they happen. So every time it happens to a cow, regardless of how I go about applying a treatment protocol or what happens to that cow, maybe she has a disease and it's something that we're not even going to treat, like a case of mastitis that really won't respond to antibiotic therapy. I still want to record it. I still want to know that it happened. So any system you can put in place to capture all of the data, the better. And then we can start looking at, our milk fever incidence has climbed over 2%. RPs have gone over 8%. We're having more than 3% DAs. Ketosis rates, clinical ketosis rates, we'd like to keep that to 5% or so. Subclinical ketosis, I think, was addressed on another podcast, but subclinical ketosis numbers. Start looking into what's gone wrong when our population shows us a higher than 15% subclinical rate. Metritis, some herds have a hard time keeping it under 20%. And then mastitis incidence, we like to keep an overall herd case incidence down below 2 cases of clinical mastitis for every 100 cows per month. And then I guess we pay more close attention to those fresher cows just because the consequence of clinical mastitis in the fresh cow is worse. It just costs a whole lot more to manage a clinical mastitis case in the early lactation compared to later on. There's a economic modeling study that looked at all the various costs associated with clinical mastitis. And when those cases happen in the first 30 days, it's estimated in around $450 per case, just because of the rest of that lactation. It just never recovers to what it would have been. And so that's why we really don't want to have to manage mastitis in the fresh cows.
Like you said, it's really important to keep track of these numbers, but just as important, I think, is to designate somebody to keep track of these numbers. It's great to have them, but it's also really important to make sure that somebody's also responsible for keeping track and watching these fresh cows in the parlor. And, not only just their milk weights, but also consistency of milk can tell a lot about the health status of cows. And to have somebody kind of trained or specialized for fresh cows is really useful on a farm.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't have enough numbers to do this, to have any real confidence that randomness is not really at fault here, but we want to be alerted as soon as we can if there's an issue. That way we're not looking at, oh, well, it looks like this disease has been out of control for the last 6 months, because there's a lot of negative things associated with waiting that long to get to the bottom of it. And so it really is nice if, like you said, we've got someone that's looking at this on a regular basis and we can be alerted to the fact that something's out of line. The earlier, the better. I mean, we don't want to raise the red flag every day, too many alerts, but it's nice we can know when an issue is real sooner rather than later. There's newer technology out now, and there's several farms taking advantage of these automated health monitoring systems. And we know them probably more comfortably just what activity monitors do for us from a reproductive standpoint. But rumination and activity monitoring automated sensors on cows can alert farm managers to health disorders in a lot of cases sooner than we can just with our traditional means of looking over cows. And so that's just kind of added a new dimension for how we can go about managing fresh cow health going forward. There's some work out of Julio Giordano's lab that was able to demonstrate at least digestive orders. These systems can alert us to issues a couple of days before our standard methods of finding cows, and with pretty high sensitivity. These systems fall a little short when it comes to things like metritis and mastitis. The sensitivity is not where we need it to be. So incorporating these systems with other means on the dairy can make us more accurate and more consistent with our diagnosis of fresh cow disorders. So you put the health monitoring systems in, you include some parlor data, looking at milk production deviations from day to day, and then you still need somebody keeping an eye on the cows to visually look out for cows that are looking like they might need some extra help. And those systems can really improve our ability to find cows that need some help and have more confidence in the data that we're analyzing. Most recently, Dr. Martin Perez finished up some work in Julio's lab and showing that comparing these health monitoring systems to our traditional mechanisms for finding or screening fresh cows, that there was no difference between the two approaches, no real differences in health event numbers, in the first 3 tests somatic cell count, removals, cows exiting the herd up to 60 days, and they follow them all the way out to 150 days. No differences in milk production and no differences in future reproductive performance. And so from a management standpoint, these systems, I think they have a place.
Yeah, and they can be really helpful, like you said, in monitoring these fresh cows right out of the gate. So one of the things that I used to like to look at when I was looking at my fresh cows was to track how their rumination increased after they calved, because you want to see that nice steady increase. And of course, if something was going wrong or you're trying to troubleshoot why she wasn't quite taking off in milk, you could look at that. And if there was a deep, dramatic dip in her rumination, it could often indicate that there was a health issue. Most likely a DA in our case was what was going on with that cow. But there are other things, like you said, like cows with mastitis might decrease their rumination minutes up to 25%, and heat stress can have a similar effect. I know that overcrowding can actually decrease rumination time by 10 to 20%, where excessive lockup time can lower it by almost 15%. So other than just looking at metabolic disease in your fresh cows, you can kind of see how different management decisions are affecting your cows by using some of this technology.
Yeah, that's really interesting information that just helps us better understand how the cows are doing out there.
Right. And then also, of course, there's no set amount of minutes that is the perfect amount that you want to reach for, because each farm's going to be a little bit different, especially depending on the diet and the amount of physically effective fiber in the diet. It can really affect the number of minutes that a cow can ruminate. And so there's not an actual like goal or a benchmark number of rumination minutes, though it usually ranges between 450 and 550 minutes per day. And heifer's a little bit less than that.
Back to the troubleshooting aspect of this, one thing that I often struggled with over the years is deciding if we feel like there's potentially a fresh cow health issue. Is the issue coming from the fresh pen itself, or is this something that started before calving? Sometimes that's tricky to differentiate, if they're coming in already set up for health issues, or is this primarily an issue associated with how we're dealing with the fresh pen itself?
Right. This happens a lot when we're thinking about fresh cow nutrition. We're often trying to minimize negative energy balance, but is this negative energy balance issue due to what is happening in the fresh cow pen now? Or is it something that's a result of the management practices that we have in place in our pre-fresh pens? In our transition cow episode, we went through a lot of different troubleshooting surrounding metabolic disease like ketosis. So you should already be able to be on the lookout for that using your basic BHBA monitors and keto sticks to help keep track of your fresh cows that way. But from a diet perspective, your nutritionist should have it pretty well balanced for the energy, protein, vitamins, and minerals needed by fresh cows. And hopefully your nutritionist for your fresh cow diet is the same one that you have for your dry cow program, or that both of the nutritionists that you have work really well together, because both diets are really important to the same cow's success, that same cow that was 21 days pre-fresh and now you're a fresh cow. But aside from what the nutritionist can do for your diet, you as a farm owner or herds person or manager can help troubleshoot maybe your fresh cows when they're not quite doing exactly what you think they should be doing as far as milk production. The diet's good, but what else can you look at? I guess my thought would be, when was the last time you or your nutritionist or feeder or herds person used the shaker box to evaluate the fresh cow ration? Lots of times it can look good on paper, but when we look at it in front of the cows, we can find clues that may tell us something that's important to how the cows are reacting or how the cows are doing in their fresh period.
Yeah, the particle separator is particularly helpful in the pre-fresh and post-fresh group. Just, understanding that this diet it comes formulated with the correct physical fiber, the correct particle size that we want, and it's not getting sorted while it's in front of the cows. And also it's been delivered the same way across the whole bunk, that we're not dealing with a mixer wagon issue and we're dropping a different diet at the beginning of feed out compared to the end of feed out. And so those shaker boxes come in real handy when we're investigating. Yeah,
definitely. And another tool that you can use to troubleshoot might be looking at the manure consistency in the pen, in the fresh cow pen. Are all the piles similar or the same? Or is there a difference? Are there some loose piles? Are there some stiff piles? And this can really tell you a lot about what and how the cows are eating, along with looking at your Penn State particle shaker box results, and also looking at what the bunk looks like after they've eaten it. If you see that the cows are leaving a lot of long particles, maybe they're sorting to the small stuff. Maybe there's not proper mixing going on. Maybe the long stuff is too long and they're just leaving it. A lot of times fresh cows, they're undergoing a lot of different changes. Sometimes they'll sort for those long particles and leave some of that concentrate behind. And that might indicate that they're looking for more scratch factor, for more forage to help maybe moderate or, keep that rumen healthy. They're looking for a little bit more fill, even though we're trying to make sure that they have enough energy in that diet. Or it could be mixed completely with everything that you need, but maybe the mixer mixed it too long. And you might see too short of particles. So that would leave cows looking for longer things to help buffer that rumen. Either way, it's a good idea to check on what the cow's doing and what's happening in the feed bunk when you're troubleshooting to help you put together that puzzle as to what might be going on.
And how about the pens themselves, Margaret?
Yeah. So when you're looking at your fresh pen, you're not only looking at who the cows are in the pen, but you're looking at what days in milk they are, what do those cows look like, and how long are they in that pen. So obviously there should be fresh cows in our fresh pen, but is it a pen of cows that are less than 21 days in milk? Are they less than 10 days in milk? Is it combined with a high group with cows milking into their peak? Are they closer to 120 days in milk sometimes? Or are there other treated or sick cows or dump cows in the pen? And how do all these things affect the dynamic of the pen? Are all these cows on the same schedule, or should they be? You know, are we locking up our fresh cows as well as maybe some mastitis cows that were just treated, or, you know, they should be high producing or heading back to high producing, and we're just using this as a very highly managed pen that might not be benefiting all the animals in it. Also, this is where we have to be careful when we're looking at and evaluating body condition score. So body condition scoring can be a really great tool to troubleshoot. If you think cows are coming into their lactation too thin or too fat, or if you're looking to see if they're losing weight too quickly after freshening, what we really want to look for is if these cows are consistent across the board. Though the score might be a little bit different from farm to farm, depending on the program, we want to look at consistency in our fresh cows. And cows coming in too heavy from the dry period are most likely going to have more metabolic issues. But on the flip side, cows coming in too thin might have trouble keeping up with the energy demand. And the key really is to minimize too much change in body condition score. Also knowing that as these fresh cows progress into their peak lactation, they may look different than what they did as a fresh cow. So that's where knowing who's in your pen and what days in milk can really help you while troubleshooting what might be going on in your pen.
Yeah, there should be pretty high uniformity when you look at body condition score as cows calve in. Like that's a time in their life cycle where there should be some pretty tight uniformity there. So we see a lot of, body scores all over the board, down to 2.5 all the way up to 4 coming into the fresh group. That's a sign that there's something's going wrong. We don't have these animals dialed in nutritionally through the dry period.
Right. Yep. That's a sign to take a step backwards to think what they're looking like in their previous stage in that dry period, so that you can start managing those cows from that stage that they come in better as a fresh cow.
Also, we need to learn a lot about just the day-to-day, the stocking density, heat abatement strategies, access to water. So as far as the fresh cow pen and the pre-fresh pen, not that we ignore it in other groups, but when we're looking into fresh cow issues, do these cows have adequate access to the feed bunk? We use 30 inches of feed bunk per cow as our kind of our rule of thumb for these high needs groups, pre and post fresh. And I don't know if I've ever been to a dairy that has a set standard weekly calving rate. So stocking densities in these special needs pens really fluctuates from week to week, month to month. And do we have enough stalls for everybody? Do we have enough feed bunk for everybody for most? Maybe it's not realistic to think for all of the year, but for most of the year, so everybody can get up and get something to eat whenever they want.
Right. Yeah. I would challenge any dairy producer out there who's listening to go look at your stocking density on that fresh pen, either at any given week or any given month, and see how they compare throughout the year, because I bet you'd be surprised how often you probably go over that 100% stocking density recommendation at feed bunks or stalls in that fresh cow pen.
Yeah, I think there's a general recommendation of stocking at 80%, and that's really just based on feed bunk. It's just I have to have so many stalls empty in order to make sure that everybody in the pen can get up and eat at the same time. So that's where that number comes from. And if you're bedding pre-fresh cows on a pack, then we use square footage, 120 square foot per cow as far as adequate space on the packs. Obviously, heat abatement is important across the dairy, but pre-fresh cows, the fresh cow pens, do they have enough fans? Are they positioned correctly? Are they operational? Do we have an ability to soak these cows? Fresh cows and pre-fresh cows are susceptible to heat stress too.
Yep. And along with that, something that you also might want to consider is, how are your fresh cows being moved and handled? Is it with care and kindness, or are they in a high traffic, busy, loud area? Stress is a huge thing to fresh cows, and it's definitely a time where energy is being allocated to many different areas, mostly milk production, but this is a time where cows have immune challenges some of the time. So we have to do our best to put both our fresh heifers and our fresh cows in an environment where they will most likely succeed. And this is, we understand that most farms and most pens are not built to be able to house fresh heifers and fresh cows separately. It just depends on how many, or the ratio of each coming through. It's usually not typical that you would have separate fresh pens, but when we can, it's important to separate those fresh heifers from those fresh cows, maybe as they enter into the main milking stream, to help them have the proper dynamics within that pen so that they can use and get to resources the best they can.
Yeah, and that socialization issue is just compounded if we're also overcrowded. Just
right.
As real estate becomes less and less available, the subordinate animals in the pens are the ones that suffer the most.
Right.
I mean, there's other things too we think of as far as what makes for a successful transition. I like to look at lameness incidents in the herd in general, but we can do some locomotion scoring in the pre-fresh group to make sure that we're not dealing with lameness through the dry period, because it doesn't matter what the diet is put in front of them. If they got some lameness, they're not going to eat as much.
If they can't get to
they're not going
it,
to do as well.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't want to forget about that. We mentioned at the start that it's hard to differentiate sometimes. Is this a pre-fresh issue or is this a post-fresh issue? I mean, there's ways we can do that with our diagnostics, with your BHBA assays. Work with your veterinarian, and you can do some diagnostics in the pre-fresh group as well and try to figure out, are these animals already mobilizing excessive body fat before they ever hit the calving pen? That can help us sort of steer towards where the most likely issue is.
I'm Margaret Quaassdorff, along with Dr. Rob Lynch. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode of Troubleshooting Herd Health Issues on Your Dairy.
Thanks for listening to this herd health troubleshooting episode. You can find more episodes like this one on the CCE Dairy Educator channel on SoundCloud or on the PRO-DAIRY website, along with many other resources.